Château Beaumont, La Selle Saint-Cloud, France, December 1944. The fire crackled in the tower room. Outside, beyond the tall windows, Paris lay dark under a winter sky, the Seine a silver ribbon winding through the blackout. Inside, 3 men hunched over wooden tables, cluttered with message pads, codebooks, and pencils worn to nubs. The clock on the mantel read 0410. Arnold Franco rubbed his eyes. 22 years old, former German student at Michigan State, now a crypt analyst with the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile, Detachment A. 6 months ago, he'd been in a classroom in Virginia learning to break codes. Now he sat in a requisitioned chateau west of Paris, working the graveyard shift, decoding German Luftwaffe traffic that had become, in recent weeks, maddeningly sparse. The Germans were losing, everyone knew it. Since D-Day, the Allied advance had been relentless. By December, the Wehrmacht was in retreat, their communications network fracturing, their air force grounded by fuel shortages and Allied air superiority. The Ardennes, that wooded sector along the Belgian-German border, had been designated a quiet zone, a rest area where green American divisions were sent to recover and where exhausted veteran units went to lick their wounds. The math seemed simple. The Allies had air supremacy, manpower, momentum. Intelligence officers at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force relied almost entirely on Ultra, the crown jewel of Allied intelligence, the British operation that had been reading German Enigma transmissions since 1940. Ultra had never failed them. When Ultra went silent, commanders assumed there was simply nothing to hear. But Ultra's brilliance masked a fatal dependency. It only worked when the enemy used radio. And for what was coming, Adolf Hitler had imposed absolute radio silence, troop movements by night, orders by courier, telephone communication within German-held territory only. 20 divisions, 4 of them elite SS Panzer units, were massing in the Eifel forests opposite the Ardennes. And Ultra heard nothing. The American First Army had stretched itself thin across 80 miles of forest and hills. The 99th Infantry Division, boys barely out of training, held the northern shoulder. The 106th Division, fresh off the boats, held the center. Experienced commanders saw no threat. German POWs who spoke of a coming offensive were dismissed as spreading disinformation. Elise Delay, a Luxembourger who had seen the build-up firsthand and been smuggled across the lines to warn American officers, was thanked politely and ignored. On the night of December 15th, along that quiet sector, American soldiers slept in farmhouses and foxholes, their artillery pieces aimed at empty forests, their supply depots unguarded, their reserve units non-existent. Franco knew none of this. His war was small, a radio set, a code book, a message pad. His enemy was abstraction, call signs, frequencies, encryption patterns. The Germans used a family of codes the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile had nicknamed after composers: Bach for bomber coordination, Mozart for reconnaissance flights, Elgar for anti-aircraft communication. The Elgar code had been quiet for weeks. Franco stretched, poured himself lukewarm coffee from a thermos. Across the table, Lieutenant Mortimer Proctor, son of the Vermont governor, one of only 2 officers in the squadron with pre-war code-breaking experience, was annotating a map with colored pencils, tracking the last known positions of Luftwaffe units. The work was meticulous, tedious, and lately pointless. There were so few messages to decode. Downstairs in the chateau's grand ballroom, the intercept operators manned their Hallicrafter radio sets, sweeping frequencies, logging call signs. Most nights they heard nothing but static and the occasional burst of Allied traffic. Tonight was no different, until it was. At 15, footsteps pounded up the tower stairs. Corporal Henley burst through the door, breath fogging in the cold air, message slip in his hand. "Intercepted transmission," he said, short, encoded Elgar. Franco took the slip, his pulse quickened. Elgar hadn't been used in over a month. He glanced at Proctor, who was already reaching for the code book. The message was brief, 12 code groups. Franco's fingers moved across the decryption table, substituting letters, checking against known patterns. Proctor worked in parallel, cross-referencing. Then at 4:19, Henley was back. Out of breath, another message slip. "Same transmission," he said. "Exact repeat." Franco looked up. In 6 months of night shifts, he had never seen a German operator Send the same message twice, not once. Duplication eliminated the possibility of corruption, of operator error, of garbled reception. The Germans wanted this message to get through. Proctor's pencil stopped moving. They're making sure we can read it. The two men bent over the decryption table. Within minutes, the message resolved into clear German. 90 Ju-52s and 15 Ju-88s, departing Paderborn area to coordinates 6 to 30 E the very 50 31 Marine 50 to 45 threading N, returning by same route. Franco pulled the map closer, his finger tracing the coordinates. The target zone was the Belgian-German border between Hofen and Monschau, right over the Ardennes. Proctor leaned back, his face pale in the firelight. 105 aircraft at night. Ju-52s were transports, three-engine workhorses, slow, obsolescent, used for hauling cargo, and Franco's stomach tightened, paratroopers. Ju-88s were versatile, bombers, night fighters, and sometimes transports. It's an airborne drop, Franco said. The Germans had not conducted a major airborne operation since Crete in 1941, where they had suffered catastrophic casualties. But 105 transport planes in the middle of the night, flying into Allied airspace, there was no other explanation. Proctor was already drafting the alert. Standard procedure immediate. Notification to 9th Air Force Headquarters in Luxembourg City. Tactical Air Command in Verviers, Chef at Versailles, and A-14F, Air Ministry Intelligence in London. Franco encoded the message, checked it twice, handed it to the runner. At 4:27, the reply came back. 4 letters, QRV, message received. That was all. No follow-up questions, no request for clarification, no acknowledgement of the implications. Just QRV. Franco stared at the slip. That's it? Proctor shrugged, but his jaw was tight. Maybe they already know. Maybe it's a drill. At 05:49, a third message crackled through the intercept sets. Franco decoded it in seconds. Operation canceled. He sent that to headquarters, too. Same reply. QRV. Franco sat back in his chair, the fire snapping in the silence. Something was wrong. 105 aircraft don't just disappear. Operations that get canceled at the last minute usually leave traces. Confusion, revised orders, frantic communication, but there was nothing, just silence. Outside the tower windows, the sky was beginning to pale. Dawn was coming. Franco closed his code book, rubbed his face, and tried to convince himself that someone, somewhere, was taking this seriously. 80 miles to the east, at 05:30, 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire along an 80-mile front. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. Jalhay, Belgium, December 16th, 1944. 05:30 hours. The ground shook. Major David Silverstein woke to the sound of the world ending. Thunder rolled across the hills, not weather, but artillery. 1,600 German guns firing in unison, a drumbeat that rattled windows and shook loose plaster from the ceiling of the requisitioned schoolhouse where Detachment B of the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile had billeted. Silverstein was on his feet before he was fully awake, pulling on boots, grabbing his field jacket. Around him, men stumbled from bunks, voices rising in confusion. What the hell? Incoming? No, it's outgoing. German, outgoing. Silverstein pushed through to the operations room. The voice intercept operators were already at their stations, headsets clamped over ears, frantically scribbling notes. Sergeant Bob Seifert looked up, his face ashen. Sir, it's massive. Every frequency's hot. Panzer divisions, artillery coordination, fighter-bomber requests. It's not a raid. It's an offensive, Silverstein finished. He moved to the map table. Detachment B was positioned astride the Eupen-Malmedy Road, their voice intercept equipment in Jalhay, west of the road. Their direction-finding vans were on high ground to the east, Barak Michel and Montrigi, the highest points in Belgium, perfect for triangulating German transmissions. Silverstein's hand hovered over the map. The artillery barrage was coming from the east, from Germany, driving west into the Ardennes, driving straight toward them. A runner burst through the door. Sir, message from Detachment A at Chateau Beaumont came in at 4:27 intelligence break. German airborne operation. Coordinates between Hofen and Monschau. Silverstein snatched the message slip. He read it twice. 90 Ju-52s, 15 Ju-88s. Paratroopers. He looked at the map. Hofen and Monschau were 15 miles northeast of Jalhay. If German paratroopers were dropping there, they were dropping between Detachment B's main base and their direction-finding vans. When did this come through? Franco's team decoded it at Ors 420, sir. Sent it to all commands. And what did headquarters say? The runner hesitated. QRV, sir, just acknowledgement. Silverstein felt ice in his chest. Franco's team didn't send frivolous alerts. If they'd broken an Elgar code about airborne operations in the middle of the night, it meant something catastrophic was happening, and headquarters had acknowledged it with 2 letters and done nothing. The barrage intensified. Silverstein made a decision. Get me 9 TAC in Verviers. Now. The radio operator worked his set, static crackling. It took 4 minutes to establish the connection. When the IX Tactical Air Command duty officer came on the line, his voice was tense but not panicked. Silverstein, we're aware of the artillery. Probably a localized counterattack. V-Corps is monitoring. Sir, we have intelligence of a German airborne operation, 100-plus transport aircraft. Our DFs are potentially behind enemy lines right now. A pause. Detachment A sent that through. We received it. The operation was canceled. Second message at 05:49. Sir, I'm requesting permission to consolidate our position. If those paratroopers... Negative. Hold position. We don't have a clear picture yet. Could be a feint. Could be disinformation. Do not abandon your intercept post. Silverstein gripped the handset. And, sir, hold position, Major. That's an order. The line went dead. Silverstein stood in the operations room, listening to the distant thunder of German guns, and understood that he was alone. Headquarters didn't believe it, or worse, they believed it, but couldn't process the implications fast enough. At 07:15, the morning duty crew went out to relieve the overnight operators at the direction-finding vans. Sergeant Seifert led the detail personally. The road east was quiet, too quiet, no traffic, no refugees, just fog and the muffled crump of artillery somewhere beyond the trees. When Seifert's jeep reached Barak Michel, the guard at the van was standing rigid, his carbine unslung, his eyes locked on the tree line. Sarge, the guard whispered, there's movement in the woods. I think they're German. Seifert dismounted slowly. Through the fog, he could see shapes. Men in field gray uniforms moving cautiously, filtering through the pines, not attacking, reconnoitering. Then he saw the parachute silk caught in the branches. His blood went cold. Franco had been right. The paratroopers had dropped, and they'd dropped right here. Seifert counted maybe 15 Germans visible through the trees. They looked exhausted, disorganized, not a combat unit, survivors, stragglers from a botched drop. One of the Germans noticed Seifert. They locked eyes across 50 yards of frozen ground. Neither moved. The Germans were too few and too weak to assault an American position. Seifert's crew was armed with carbines, short-range weapons useless in a firefight against men with machine pistols. A Mexican standoff balanced on a knife edge. Seifert backed slowly to the jeep, never taking his eyes off the tree line. Mount up, we're leaving now. The van operator scrambled into the vehicles. Seifert drove back to Jalhay with his foot on the floor, his heart hammering. When he reported to Silverstein, the major's face hardened. Pack it up, Silverstein said. We're moving north to join Detachment D at Foron-Saint-Pierre. Sir, en tasse, said to hold position. Attack doesn't know what's happening. We do. Silverstein's voice was flat, final. We move in 30 minutes. If we're still here when the Panzers arrive, we're done. By 09 soir, Detachment B was on the road, their trucks loaded with intercept equipment and code books rolling north through roads clogged with confused American units and terrified Belgian civilians. By noon, Kampfgruppe Piper, Joachim Piper's spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, had reached Malmedy, 8 miles south of where Detachment B had been that morning. If Silverstein had waited for orders, his entire unit would have been overrun. Chateau Beaumont, La Celle Saint-Cloud, France, December 16th, 1944. 18 hours. Arnold Franco sat in the tower room, staring at the map. All day reports had trickled in, fragmentary, contradictory. German breakthrough near Losheim Gap. American units cut off, communications disrupted. But nothing from headquarters about the paratroop alert. Nothing about whether Franco's message had been acted upon. Lieutenant Proctor came up the stairs holding a fresh message slip. RAF intercept stations at Cheadle confirmed our traffic, he said quietly. They picked up the same JU-52 messages, sent it to London. Did London do anything? Proctor didn't answer. Franco looked back at the map, at the coordinates he'd plotted at 0420 that morning, between Hofen and Monschau. He thought about the 2 hours of warning they'd provided, 2 hours to scramble fighters, to alert anti-aircraft batteries, to prepare for what was coming. 2 hours that no one had used. Outside night was falling over Paris. The city lights remained dark, in the blackout absolute. Franco picked up his pencil and returned to the intercept log, writing the day's summary in careful block letters. Somewhere in the Ardennes, men were dying, and the only advance warning of the German offensive, the only intelligence received in low-grade air codes, had been sent by 3 men in a tower room working the midnight shift who had decoded a message no one wanted to believe. Franco closed the logbook and wondered if anyone would ever read it. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles, France, December 16, 1944. 06:45 hours. Major General Kenneth Strong stood before the operations map in the intelligence briefing room, a red telephone receiver pressed to his ear, listening to a report from V Corps headquarters. His face remained professionally neutral, but his jaw tightened with each passing second. "Repeat that," he said quietly. The voice on the other end was strained, breaking up through static. "Massive artillery barrage across the entire Ardennes front, sir, from Monschau south to Echternach. We estimate 1,500 to 2,000 tubes. It's been going for over an hour." Strong glanced at the clock. 06:47. The barrage had begun at 05:30. Over an hour of sustained fire meant this was not harassment, not a raid. This was preparation for something large. "What's the ground situation?" "Fragmentary, sir. Communications are disrupted. Fog is heavy. We have reports of German infantry penetrations at multiple points. The 99th Division is heavily engaged near Losheim. The 106th reports probing attacks. The 28th, the line crackled and went dead." Strong set down the receiver and turned to the junior intelligence officer standing behind him. "Wake General Smith. Tell him we have a developing situation in the Ardennes." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there was a signals intercept overnight from the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile. German airborne operation over 100 transport aircraft." Strong's eyes narrowed. "When?" "Message logged at 0427, sir. Coordinates between Hofen and Monschau." "Now TAC received it. So did 9th Air Force and A-14F. "And?" "No action taken, sir. The operation was reportedly canceled in a follow-up transmission." Strong walked to the map, his finger tracing the Ardennes sector. Hofen and Monschau, northern shoulder of the quiet zone. If the Germans were dropping paratroopers there, it meant they were trying to seize critical road junctions, which meant they needed those roads for something. "Get me the duty log from 9th Air Force. I want to know exactly what they did with that intercept." The officer left. Strong remained at the map, his mind racing through the intelligence briefings of the past month. Ultra had gone silent in early December. Unusual, but not unprecedented when the Germans imposed radio discipline. Prisoner interrogations had yielded scattered reports of a coming offensive. But POW intelligence was notoriously unreliable. Resistance sources had reported troop buildups, but the consensus at Shaef was that these were defensive preparations, not offensive staging. Now, staring at the red pins marking the artillery barrage, Strong realized they had missed it. All of them. The entire Allied intelligence apparatus. The Germans were attacking 1st Army Headquarters, Spa, Belgium, December the 16th, 1944. 8:30 hours. Colonel Benjamin Monk Dixon stood in the communications tent reading the overnight traffic summaries with growing alarm. Dixon was 1st Army's G2 Chief of Intelligence, and for the past 2 weeks he had been filing reports warning of a German buildup opposite the Ardennes. No one had listened. Dixon had built his analysis from fragments. Prisoner statements about a big push, increased Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over Allied positions, civilian reports of troop movements at night, the sudden disappearance of elite SS Panzer divisions from the order of battle. He had concluded in a report dated December 10th that the Germans were preparing a major counteroffensive through the Ardennes, aimed at splitting the Allied armies and recapturing Antwerp. His superior, General Courtney Hodges, had thanked him politely and filed the report. The problem was credibility. Dixon had been wrong before, memorably wrong, just weeks earlier, when he'd predicted a German collapse that never materialized. His reputation as an alarmist had preceded this new warning, and when he briefed his findings at Chef, he was met with polite skepticism. Now, with German artillery tearing apart the American front line, Dixon's warning seemed prophetic, but prophecy without action was just noise. A signals officer entered the tent, handing Dixon a decoded message. "Sir, this came through from the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile, overnight. Airborne operation." Dixon scanned the message. 105 transport aircraft paratroopers between Hofen and Montmonschau. "When was this sent?" 0427, sir." 4 hours ago. Dixon looked up sharply. "Has anyone scrambled interceptors, alerted the anti-aircraft battalions?" The signals officer shifted uncomfortably. "Unknown, sir. The message went to 9th Air Force and NARS TAC. We only got a copy." Dixon crumpled the message slip in his fist. 4 hours. The Germans had given them 4 hours of warning, and intercepted transmission decoded and distributed through proper channels, and no one had acted. He thought about the young cryptanalysts who had broken that code. He thought about them sitting in some headquarters waiting for acknowledgement, for orders, for someone to care. And he thought about the soldiers on the line, young men from the 99th and 106th Divisions, who were at this moment being hit by an enemy force they had been told was incapable of offensive action. Dixon walked to the map table. The Ardennes front was 80 miles wide, held by 4 divisions. By German doctrine, an offensive required at least a 3-to-1 advantage, which meant the Germans had massed 12 divisions at minimum, more likely 15 or 20, against 4 American divisions spread thin, poorly supplied, and completely unprepared. "Get me General Hodges," Dixon said quietly. Eupen Malmedy Road, Belgium, December 17th, 1944. 07:15 hours. The bodies of the German paratroopers lay scattered across the frozen fields. Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich von der Heide sat with his back against a tree, his leg broken, his battalion destroyed. Operation Stösser, the airborne assault that was supposed to seize the critical road junction at Barak Michel and hold it for the advancing panzers, had been a catastrophe. Of the 1,200 Fallschirmjäger who had jumped into the darkness over Belgium, fewer than 300 had landed anywhere near the objective. The rest were scattered across miles of forest and farmland, lost, injured, or captured. Von der Heide's own stick had been dropped 15 miles off target. By the time he'd rallied 100 men and limped toward the objective, American anti-aircraft fire was waiting. They had known. Somehow, impossibly, the Americans had known about the drop. The Ack-Ack batteries had been ready, tracking the lumbering Ju-52s as they crossed the border at low altitude. Von der Heide had watched transport after transport explode in midair, spiraling down in flames, carrying his men to their deaths. And then, adding humiliation to disaster, German anti-aircraft units, never informed of the operation, had opened fire on their own aircraft. Von der Heide had never seen such chaos. In Crete, at least the enemy had been surprised. Here, nothing had gone right. The pathfinders had missed the drop zone. The weather had scattered the formations. The radios didn't work. And the Americans had been waiting. He looked at the young corporal sitting beside him, a Berliner with a bandaged hand. "How many do we have left?" "Maybe 90, Herr Oberstleutnant, spread out over 5 kilometers. 90. Out of 1,200. Von der Heide closed his eyes. Kampfgruppe Piper was supposed to reach Barak Michel by dawn, supported by his paratroopers holding the high ground. Instead, Piper would arrive to find nothing but American positions, fully alerted and a scattering of German survivors hiding in the woods. Get the men together, von der Heide said. We'll move north, try to link up with the 6th Panzer Army. They never made it. Within 3 days, von der Heide's survivors would be surrounded, starving, and out of ammunition. On December 22nd, he would surrender to American forces, becoming one of the highest-ranking German officers captured during the Battle of the Bulge. But on the morning of December 17th, sitting in the frozen forest with his broken leg and his shattered battalion, von der Heide understood only one thing. Someone had warned the Americans. Someone had broken the code. Chateau Beaumont, La Salle Saint-Cloud, France, December 17th, 1944. 14 Zers. Arnold Franco sat at the intercept log, recording the day's traffic. The German radio networks were alive again. Operational orders, tactical update, situation reports. The strict radio silence of the past month had been abandoned in the chaos of combat. Franco logged each transmission methodically, noting call signs, frequencies, encryption types. The work was mechanical now, almost meditative. He didn't think about what the messages meant. He didn't think about the battles they described. He especially didn't think about the message from Orzel 4:15 yesterday morning. Lieutenant Proctor came up the tower stairs holding a folder. He sat down across from Franco without speaking. RAF Cheadle sent their after action, Proctor said finally. On the airborne intercept, Franco looked up, and they picked up the same traffic, decoded it independently, sent it to Air Ministry Intelligence in London at 04:35, 10 minutes after we did. Did London do anything? Proctor opened the folder, pulled out a typed summary. American anti-aircraft battalions engaged German transport aircraft at approximately 06:45 on December 17th. Shot down 36 Ju-52s and 11 Ju-88s. The paratroop operation was a complete failure. Fewer than 300 Germans reached their objective. The rest were scattered, captured, or killed. Franco absorbed this. So they did use our intelligence. Maybe the AK crews just heard the engines and started shooting. We don't know. Proctor closed the folder. What we know is that the only advance warning of the German offensive, the only signals intelligence in low-grade codes, was what we sent at Balfour 27. 2 hours before the artillery barrage. 2 hours. Franco thought about those 2 hours. Thought about what could have been done with them. Reserves could have been alerted, artillery repositioned, infantry units pulled out of exposed positions. But none of that had happened. The German offensive had achieved complete surprise. 3 German armies, 20 divisions, including 4 elite SS Panzer divisions, had smashed into 4 unprepared American divisions. The front had collapsed. Entire regiments had been overrun. The 106th Division had been cut off and would surrender in the largest mass capture of American forces in the European theater. And all of it might have been prevented, or at least mitigated, if someone somewhere had taken 2 hours of warning seriously. Do you think anyone will remember? Franco asked quietly. Proctor looked at him for a long moment. No, he said. I don't think anyone will remember Homer at all. Outside, the winter afternoon was fading into dusk. The Seine flowed past the chateau, dark and cold, indifferent to the disasters unfolding 80 miles to the east. Franco returned to his log, his pencil moving across the page, recording the intercepts that no one would read, the warnings that no one would heed. The midnight shift continued. Lanzerath Ridge, Belgium, December the 16th, 1944. 14:30 hours. Lieutenant Lyle Buck was 20 years old, one of the youngest officers in the United States Army, and he was about to make a decision that would save thousands of lives. His intelligence and reconnaissance platoon, 18 men from the 99th Infantry Division, had been holding a position on Lanzerath Ridge since dawn, watching a German battalion of 500 paratroopers probe their lines. For 9 hours, Buck's men had fired with disciplined precision, using every bullet as if it were their last, because it very nearly was. The Germans kept coming. Buck crouched in his foxhole, snow caked on his helmet, his M1 carbine almost too cold to touch. Below him in the valley, he could see the Fallschirmjäger regrouping for another assault. Behind them, through gaps in the fog, he caught glimpses of something that made his blood freeze. tanks. Panzer IVs, dozens of them, engines idling, waiting. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Joachim Peiper's spearhead, the tip of the German offensive, and 18 Americans stood in their way. Buch's radio operator, Corporal William James, crawled over through the snow. "Sir, I can't raise battalion. Lines are cut. Radio's dead." "How much ammunition left?" "Maybe 20 rounds per man. Sloan's got 3 grenades. That's it." Buch looked at his watch. They'd been fighting since 05:30, 9 hours. His orders had been to observe and report. Instead, they'd fought a delaying action against overwhelming odds, buying time for the units behind them to organize a defense, time they'd purchased with their lives. "Sir," James said quietly, "we did good, but if we stay here—" "I know." At 14:45, the Germans flanked them. Buch saw the Fallschirmjäger moving through the woods to their left, cutting off their escape route. He made the hardest decision of his life. "Cease fire, hands up, we're done." The 18 men of the I&R platoon surrendered. They had inflicted 92 casualties on the Germans and delayed the entire 1st SS Panzer Division by 20 hours. The Panzers, convinced the woods were filled with American infantry and tank destroyers, had refused to advance until the strong resistance was eliminated. 20 hours. In the calculus of war, those 20 hours were incalculable. They gave the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions time to establish defensive positions on the northern shoulder of the German offensive. They prevented Kampfgruppe Peiper from seizing the fuel depots at Stavelot on the first day. They saved the critical road network that would allow Patton's Third Army to counterattack from the south. 18 men, 20 hours. Thousands of lives saved, and none of them would be recognized for their actions until decades after the war ended. Over Belgium, December 17, 1944. Our 6th, 40 hours. Technical Sergeant Raymond Keller manned the 90mm anti-aircraft gun of Battery B, 447th Automatic Weapons Battalion near Eupen. The pre-dawn darkness was absolute, the fog so thick he could barely see the barrel of his own gun. Then he heard them, a low, droning rumble from the east, multiple engines, heavy, laboring. Keller had been manning Ack position since D-Day, and he knew that sound. Ju-52s, German transports. "Range?" he barked. His assistant gunner peered through the optical sight. "Can't see them, Sarge. Fog's too thick." "Use your ears, track the sound." The other batteries long. The Eupen defensive line were coming alive now. Searchlights stabbing upward into the murk, trying to illuminate targets they could only hear. Keller cranked the elevation wheel, raising the barrel to 60 degrees, listening to the engines grow louder. Then for just a moment, the fog thinned. Keller saw them, a formation of Ju-52s flying at barely 800 feet, their black crosses visible even in the dim light. Transports. Slow. Vulnerable. "Fire!" The 90mm gun roared. Across the line, 16 other batteries opened up simultaneously. The sky erupted in flak bursts, orange blossoms of fire and shrapnel. Keller's loader was already ramming home the next round, the gun crew working with mechanical efficiency. The first Ju-52 disintegrated, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Keller didn't stop to count. He just kept firing, his world reduced to load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. The transports were trying to scatter, but they were too slow, too low, too exposed. They were target practice. When the fog closed in again 15 minutes later, Keller's gun was silent, the barrel glowing dull red. Around him, the ground was littered with spent shell casings. In the valley below, wreckage burned. "How many?" someone asked. Keller shook his head. He didn't know. Dozens, maybe. He'd never seen shooting like that, like the Germans had flown straight into a trap. He didn't know about the message sent by Arnold Franco at 04:15 that morning. He didn't know about the decoded Elgar transmission, the warning of 105 transport aircraft, the intelligence that had been distributed to headquarters across the theater. He didn't know if someone had used that intelligence to position his battery, or if he'd just been lucky. All he knew was that the Germans had come, and his gun had been ready. Kampfgruppe Peiper, Losheim Gap, Belgium, December 17, 1944. No nine Nassers. Ours, SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper stood in the turret of his command tank. binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the road ahead with mounting frustration. His battle group, the spearhead of the entire 6th Panzer Army, should have been in Stavelot by now, should have seized the fuel depots, should have been halfway to the Meuse River. Instead, they were crawling through the Ardennes at walking speed, delayed by traffic jams, blown bridges, and infuriatingly stubborn American resistance. The delay at Lanzerath had cost him 20 hours. 20 hours waiting for the Fallschirmjäger to clear a single ridge, only to discover it had been defended by 18 men. 18 now. Approaching the village of Honsfeld, Piper's vanguard was encountering pockets of American troops who should not have been there. Troops who were alert, troops who had prepared defensive positions. It was as if they had known. Piper's orders were explicit: maximum speed, no stops, seize the bridges before the Americans could blow them. But maximum speed was impossible when every village, every crossroads, every bridge approach was contested. His Tiger tanks were guzzling fuel at catastrophic rates. The massive machines consumed nearly 2 gallons per mile, and the roads of the Ardennes were steep, winding, and icy. Piper's fuel trucks were stuck somewhere behind him in the monumental traffic jam that the German offensive had become. "How much fuel do we have?" he asked his operations officer. "Enough to reach Stavelot. After that, we capture American fuel or we walk." But when Kampfgruppe Piper reached Stavelot on December 18th, a full day behind schedule, they found the fuel depot empty. American engineers had burned 3 million gallons of gasoline rather than let it fall into German hands. Piper's offensive, the entire northern thrust of the Ardennes operation, began to die there. Not from American counterattack, not from airstrikes, but from lack of fuel. The panzers ran dry, one by one, their crews abandoning them beside the roads, retreating on foot. Château-Beaumont, La Celle Saint-Cloud, France, December 19th, 1944. 22 hours. Arnold Franco sat in the tower room, listening to the radio traffic from the Ardennes. The German networks were frantic now. Requests for reinforcements, reports of fuel shortages, desperate calls for air support that would never come. The offensive was stalling, not defeated yet. The bulge in the Allied lines was 60 miles deep, and American forces were still being pushed back. But the momentum was broken. The weather was clearing, allowing Allied air superiority to assert itself. Patton's Third Army was driving north to relieve Bastogne. The 101st Airborne was holding the town despite being completely surrounded. Franco read the intercepts and decoded the messages, and he could see the shape of what was coming. The Germans had gambled everything on speed and surprise. They had achieved surprise, but they had not achieved speed, and without speed the offensive was doomed. Lieutenant Proctor came up the stairs holding a teletype message. Just came through from Schiaff. They're requesting a full report on the airborne intercept from December 16th. They want to know why the warning wasn't acted upon. Franco looked up. Now they want to know? Apparently there's going to be an inquiry. Someone high up is asking questions about the intelligence failure. Franco almost laughed. Intelligence failure. As if the intelligence hadn't existed. As if he and Proctor and the overnight intercept operators hadn't done their jobs perfectly. The intelligence had been flawless. The system had failed. What do we tell them? Franco asked. Proctor sat down heavily. The truth. We intercepted the transmission at 4:15. We decoded it by 0420. We distributed it through all proper channels. At 4:27, we received acknowledgement, and then nothing. And the anti-aircraft batteries? No confirmation that they were alerted by our message. They might have been. They might have just reacted to the sound of engines. We'll probably never know. Franco closed the logbook. Outside, the December night was cold and clear. He could see stars through the tower windows, bright and indifferent. Somewhere in the Ardennes, young men were dying. 19,000 Americans would be killed before the Battle of the Bulge ended. Thousands more would be wounded, captured, or listed as missing. Entire divisions would be shattered. And the only advance warning, the only signals intelligence that had penetrated the German radio silence, had been a 12-group Elgar code, decoded by a 22-year-old college student on the midnight shift. Franco thought about the 2 hours of warning they had provided. 2 hours that could have changed everything if anyone had been listening. Bastogne, Belgium. December 22nd, 1944. 11:30. Hours. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe read the German surrender ultimatum for the second time, then looked at his staff officers gathered in the cramped basement command post. Outside, the town was surrounded by 5 German divisions, the 101st Airborne Division and attached units. Roughly 18,000 men were cut off, low on ammunition, out of medical supplies, and running short on food. The Germans were offering honorable surrender. McAuliffe's response entered military legend in a single word: nuts. But beneath that defiant reply lay a calculation. McAuliffe knew Patton's Third Army was driving north. He knew the weather was clearing, which meant air resupply was coming. And he knew, though he couldn't articulate exactly how, that the German offensive had lost its momentum. What McAuliffe didn't know was that the momentum had been bleeding away since the morning of December 17th, when Joachim Peiper's panzers, delayed by 20 hours at Landsrath Ridge, arrived at Stavelot to find the fuel depots burning. He didn't know that Operation Stosur, the airborne assault that should have seized the high ground and road junctions, had been catastrophically disrupted by American anti-aircraft fire that seemed to the German paratroop commanders impossibly well prepared. He didn't know about Arnold Franco, or the midnight shift at Chateau Beaumont, or the 2 hours of warning that someone somewhere might have used. All McAuliffe knew was that if his men could hold for another 72 hours, they would survive. They held. On December 26th, the lead tanks of Patton's 4th Armored Division broke through to Bastogne. The siege was lifted. The German offensive, already stalled, began to collapse. Bad Vilbel, Germany, May 8, 1945, 15 KR hours. The war in Europe ended with a whimper at the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile's final posting. Arnold Franco stood outside the requisitioned Kurhaus, a spa building converted to military use, watching American trucks roll past on the Frankfurt Road. The vehicles were heading west now, not east. The shooting was over. Germany had surrendered. Detachment A had followed the Allied armies all the way from Normandy through France, Belgium, and finally into Germany itself. They had intercepted thousands of messages, decoded hundreds of operations, provided intelligence that had saved countless lives and won dozens of battles. No one had ever thanked them. Franco thought about that sometimes in the quiet hours. The anonymous nature of their war. They had never fired a shot, never seen the enemy except as abstract patterns in radio traffic. Their victories were invisible. Battles prevented, disasters averted, lives saved through information that reached the right people at the right time, except when it didn't. Lieutenant Proctor walked over, carrying 2 bottles of captured German beer. He handed one to Franco without speaking. They stood together, drinking in silence, watching the sun set over a continent that had finally stopped killing itself. "Ever wonder if it mattered?" Franco asked. Proctor didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. The work mattered. What happened with the work? That was out of our hands. 19,000, Proctor looked at him. 19,000 American dead at the Bulge, Franco said. I looked it up. 19,000 in 6 weeks. The bloodiest American battle in the European theater. You can't... I'm not saying we could have stopped it, but 2 hours, Mort. We gave them 2 hours. What could they have done with 2 hours? Proctor took a long drink. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe the anti-aircraft batteries that shot down those transports were positioned because of our message. Maybe they weren't. Maybe Detachment B got out of Jalhay because Silverstein read our traffic and knew something big was coming. Maybe he would have evacuated anyway. Maybes. That's intelligence work. You put the information out there and you hope someone smarter than you knows what to do with it. Proctor crushed his empty bottle. What we did was right. We broke the code. We sent the alert. We did our job. Franco nodded slowly, but he thought about the clock in the tower room at Chateau Beaumont, about the fire crackling in the silence, about the moment when he realized that the duplicated message meant something catastrophic was about to happen. And he thought about the reply. QRV. Message received. Nothing more. The Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. September the 15th, 1945. The classified after-action report on intelligence failures during the Battle of the Bulge ran to 347 pages. It was compiled by a joint Army-Air Force investigative team, cross-referenced with British intelligence archives, and stamped secret in red ink. On page 212, buried in a subsection titled Signals Intelligence Low-Grade Tactical Codes, there was a single paragraph. At 04:15 hours on 16th of December 1944, Detachment A of the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile, attached to 9th Air Force, intercepted and decoded German Luftwaffe traffic indicating an airborne operation involving 105 transport aircraft in the Ardennes sector. This intelligence was distributed to appropriate commands at 04:27 hours. The operation, later identified as Unternehmen Stösser, was executed on 17th of December with catastrophic results for German forces. American anti-aircraft units engaged the transport formations, destroying an estimated 47 aircraft. The extent to which the prior warning influenced AAA positioning remains undetermined. This represents the only tactical signals intelligence obtained prior to the German offensive. One paragraph. 63 words. The entire midnight shift reduced to a bureaucratic footnote. The report's conclusion was damning but vague. Allied intelligence had failed to predict the Ardennes offensive due to overdependence on Ultra, inadequate coordination between intelligence services, and institutional resistance to unconventional threat assessments. Recommendations included improved signals intelligence training, better integration of tactical and strategic intelligence, enhanced communication between field units and higher commands. Nowhere in the 347 pages was Arnold Franco's name mentioned, nor Mortimer Proctor's, nor any of the intercept operators who had manned the Hallicrafter radios through the long December night. The report was classified secret and filed in a vault at the National Security Agency's predecessor organization. It would remain there for 51 years. New York City, December 1945. Arnold Franco walked out of the discharge center at Fort Dix with his separation papers, his service medals in a small cardboard box, and $200 in mustering out pay. He was 23 years old. The war was over. His life, his real life, the one he'd put on hold in 1943, was supposed to start now. He took the train to New York, found a cheap hotel room, and sat on the bed staring at the wall. He had survived. Tens of thousands hadn't. Some of them, he would never know how many, might have survived if someone had acted on the intelligence he had provided, or maybe not. Maybe the entire battle would have unfolded exactly the same way, regardless. Maybe his 2 hours of warning had changed nothing. The uncertainty was worse than knowing. Franco opened his duffel bag and pulled out the single personal item he'd kept from his service, a carbon copy of the message log from the night of December 15th, 1944. He'd made the copy himself, against regulations, in the weeks after the battle. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he wanted proof. Maybe he needed to remember that he had tried. He read the entries. Aura 415, intercept. Luftwaffe Elgar code. Transmission origin, Paderborn area. Content, 90JU52, 15JU88. Transport mission coordinates, 60-96, 30E, 50-31, 50-45, and A419. Intercept, identical repeat of previous transmission. 0420, decode. Complete airborne operation, Belgian border sector. 0427, alert. Transmitted 9th Air Force HQ, NI tax, Schaeff, A14F. 0428, acknowledgement, received QRV. Franco folded the paper and put it back in his bag. Then he lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally came. Bastogne War Cemetery, Belgium, November 1964. 20 years after the battle, the American cemetery at Bastogne held the remains of 306 soldiers who had died in the Ardennes campaign. The white marble crosses stretched in perfect rows across the hillside, each one marking a life that had ended in the winter of 1944. Arnold Franco stood before one of the crosses, reading the name. PFC Robert J. Mitchell, 101st Airborne Division, died December 21st, 1944, age 19. Franco didn't know Robert Mitchell, didn't know if he'd died at Bastogne or somewhere else in the Ardennes. Didn't know if an extra 2 hours of warning would have made any difference to him specifically. But Mitchell was 19. the same age Franco had been when he'd enlisted. Franco had come to Belgium on a business trip. He worked for an electronics company now selling radio equipment to European clients. The trip had been planned months in advance, but when he saw Bastogne on the itinerary, he'd extended his stay by 2 days. He needed to see it, needed to walk the ground where the battle had been fought. The Ardennes were peaceful now. The forests had regrown over the shell craters. The villages had been rebuilt. Children played in the streets where panzers had once rolled. Franco walked the perimeter of the cemetery, reading names, calculating ages. So many were younger than he had been, boys really, sent to hold a line against an enemy force 3 times their size in weather cold enough to freeze a man to death overnight. They had held, against all odds, against every reasonable calculation, they had held, and Franco thought maybe it didn't matter that headquarters had ignored his warning. Maybe the individual soldiers on the line, the Lyle Bokes and the Raymond Kellers and the Robert Mitchells, maybe they would have fought just as hard, just as bravely, regardless of whether some distant commander had positioned them slightly differently. Maybe heroism didn't need warning. Maybe it just needed men willing to stand in the gap. But walking among the graves, Franco couldn't shake the question, how many of these crosses might not be here? If someone had listened, he would never know. The certainty he craved, the validation that his work had mattered, or the absolution that nothing he could have done would have changed the outcome, would never come. All he had was the memory of a midnight shift, a duplicated message, and a 2-letter acknowledgement that meant nothing and everything. Chateau Beaumont, La Celle Saint-Cloud, France, November 1964. On the same trip, Franco drove to the outskirts of Paris and found the chateau where Detachment A had been stationed. It was a private residence now, beautifully maintained, the tower where he'd worked converted to a library. Franco stood at the gates, looking up at the windows where he'd spent those long winter nights, and remembered the view of the Seine, the crackling fire, the helicrafter radios with their glowing dials. He didn't knock, didn't ask to go inside. The current owners wouldn't understand. The tower room where he decoded the Elgar message was just a room now, full of books and comfortable furniture, with no trace of the war that had passed through it. Franco stood there for 20 minutes, remembering, then walked back to his rental car. Some ghosts were best left undisturbed. Arnold Franco's home, New Jersey, December 1990. Franco was 68 years old, retired, spending his days gardening and reading, when the letter arrived from the National Security Agency. It was brief, formal, and stunning. Dear Mr. Franco, as part of our ongoing declassification review, we are releasing documents related to signals intelligence operations during World War II. Records indicate you served with the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile, Detachment A, from 1944-1945. We are contacting veterans whose work is referenced in these documents to inform them of the declassification and to offer our gratitude for your service. Enclosed, please find a summary of operations in which you participated. Sincerely, Franco's hand shook as he opened the enclosed pages. There, in dry, bureaucratic prose, was the story of his war, the intercepts, the decodes, the intelligence summaries, and on page 4, a section titled Battle of the Bulge, Airborne Warning, December 16, 1944. Franco read it 3 times. The only advance intelligence of the German offensive received in low-grade air codes was the warning of the parachute landings transmitted by DT. A at 04:27 hours. Records indicate American AAA units engaged German transport aircraft approximately 14 hours later with significant effect. The extent to which prior warning influenced AAA positioning cannot be definitively established. Franco set down the pages and walked to his study. From a filing cabinet, he pulled out the carbon copy of the message log he'd carried for 46 years. He laid it on the desk next to the NSA letter. 2 documents, 2 versions of the same story. One written by a young man in real time, hoping someone would listen. The other written by bureaucrats decades later, admitting that someone might have. Franco sat in his study as the December afternoon faded into evening. and he thought about certainty and doubt and the weight of things that could never be proven. He had done his job. That much was certain. Everything else was maybe National Security Agency headquarters, Fort Meade, Maryland, June 1996. Dr. Robert Hanyok sat in the reading room of the NSA's Declassification Review Office, surrounded by cardboard boxes that smelled of old paper and institutional neglect. Each box contained files from World War II signals intelligence operations, thousands of pages of intercepts, decrypts, and after-action reports that had been sealed for half a century. Hanyok was a historian, part of the team tasked with reviewing Cold War-era classifications and determining what could safely be released to the public. The work was tedious, technical, and occasionally revelatory. Today was one of those occasions. He opened a file marked 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile, G, Operations Log, December 1944. Inside were carbon copies of message logs, handwritten in careful block letters, documenting every intercept, every decode, every intelligence alert sent by Detachment A during the Battle of the Bulge. Hanyok had read dozens of similar logs, but something about this one caught his attention. December 16th, 1944, 04:15 hours. An Elgar code the intercept about German transport aircraft. Decoded by 04:20, alert transmitted at 04:27. And then, at 05:30, 73 minutes later, the German offensive had begun. Hanyok cross-referenced the file with other documents. British RAF intercept stations at Cheadle had picked up the same transmission and decoded it independently. Air Ministry Intelligence in London had received the warning. So had 9th Air Force, Non-Tactical Air Command, and SHIAF. But nowhere in the command logs for December 16th could Hanyok find evidence that anyone had acted on the intelligence in those critical 73 minutes. He kept reading. The German airborne operation, Operation Stösser, had been executed on December 17th and had been a disaster. American anti-aircraft battalions had shot down nearly 40 transport aircraft. The paratroop drop had been scattered, ineffective, catastrophic. Had the ALRA units been positioned because of the December 16th warning, or had they simply reacted to the sound of engines? The files didn't say. They couldn't say. The uncertainty was built into the historical record. But what was certain, what Hanyok could prove from the documents in front of him, was that a handful of cryptanalysts working the midnight shift had provided the only tactical warning of the largest German offensive of 1944. And that warning had been transmitted through proper channels with nearly 2 hours of lead time, 2 hours that might have changed everything or nothing. Hanyok made a note to include this in the declassification summary. The public deserved to know. The veterans deserved to know. He wondered if any of them were still alive. Arnold Franco's home, New Jersey, August 1996. The second letter from the National Security Agency arrived on a Tuesday morning. Franco was 74 years old now, his hands arthritic, his hearing failing, but his mind still sharp. He opened the envelope with a kitchen knife and unfolded 3 pages of densely typed text. Dear Mr. Franco, following our previous communication regarding declassification of World War II, sir, signals intelligence documents, we are pleased to provide you with additional information that has been cleared for public release. Franco sat down at the kitchen table and read. The letter contained a detailed summary of the December 16, 1944 intercept operation, times, call signs, code designations, distribution lists. Everything that he and Lieutenant Proctor and the overnight shift had done, documented in precise bureaucratic language. And then, on page 2, a paragraph that made Franco's breath catch. Subsequent analysis indicates that the intelligence provided by Detachment A on 16th of December 1944 represents the only advance warning of the German Ardennes offensive obtained through signals intelligence. While German forces maintained strict radio silence for ground operations, the Luftwaffe airborne mission, Operation Stösser, required radio coordination that was intercepted, decoded, and distributed by your unit approximately 73 minutes prior to the commencement of the German artillery barrage. Records indicate that American anti-aircraft units engaged German transport formations on 17th of December with significant effect, contributing to the catastrophic failure of the airborne operation. The extent to which your unit's intelligence directly influenced Ebelos LA positioning cannot be definitively established from available documentation. However, it is clear that Detachment A fulfilled its mission with exceptional competence under time-sensitive circumstances. Franco read the paragraph 3 times, then he set down the letter and walked to his study. From the filing cabinet, he retrieved the carbon copy of the message log, his talisman, his proof, the document he'd carried for 52 years. He laid it on the desk next to the NSA letter. Cannot be definitively established. After 52 years, that was the best answer he would ever get. Not confirmation, not absolution, just the acknowledgement that he had done his job and that maybe it had mattered. Franco thought about the young man he'd been in 1944, 22 years old, sitting in a tower room in France, decoding a message that would reach him across 5 decades. That young man had wanted certainty. He'd wanted to know that his work had saved lives, had changed outcomes, had mattered in some quantifiable way. But the old man Franco had become understood, something the young man couldn't. Certainty was a luxury that intelligence work rarely provided. You did the job. You sent the information up the chain, and then you lived with the uncertainty of never knowing exactly what happened next. He picked up the telephone and called a number he'd kept in his address book for 40 years. Proctor residence? Mort? It's Arnie Franco. There was a pause, then Arnie, good God, it's been, 10 years? 12. I got a letter from NSA about the bulge. Another pause. So did I. Came yesterday. Did you read the part about the A engagement? Yeah, I read it. Franco leaned back in his chair. What do you think? Proctor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 52 years of the same question. I think we did our job, Arnie. I think we broke the code, we sent the alert, and we gave them everything we had. What they did with it, that was never our responsibility. But if they'd acted faster, if is a word that'll drive you crazy, I spent 20 years asking if. If they'd positioned reserves, if they'd alerted the frontline units, if they'd taken the intelligence seriously, but you can if yourself to death. Franco nodded, even though Proctor couldn't see him. So we'll never know. No, we'll never know. But I'll tell you what I do know. Raymond Keller's AAA battery shot down those transports. Lyle Boak's platoon held Lanzerath Ridge for 20 hours. Detachment B got out of Jalhay before Piper's Panzers arrived. Maybe our message had nothing to do with any of that. Maybe it did. But those men did their jobs just like we did ours. 19,000 dead, Mort. I know. I think about them too. But Arnie, we gave them 2 hours. 2 hours of warning that nobody else had. If command didn't use it, that's on command, not on us. Franco closed his eyes. The validation he'd sought for 52 years wasn't coming. Not in the form he'd wanted. But Proctor was right. They had done their job. The rest, the command decisions, the tactical deployments, the outcomes that rippled across 6 weeks of brutal combat, had never been theirs to control. Thanks, Mort. You okay? Yeah, I'm okay. After he hung up, Franco sat in his study for a long time, looking at the 2 documents on his desk. The message log from 1944, the NSA letter from 1996. 52 years between them. He thought about all the nights he'd worked the midnight shift, all the codes he'd broken, all the intelligence he'd sent up the chain. Most of it had disappeared into the vast machinery of war, used or ignored, acted upon or filed away. He would never know which messages had mattered and which hadn't, but he had done the work. That was enough. It had to be enough. Warfare History Network Office, Leesburg, Virginia, December 2000. The article submission arrived via email with the subject line, Code Breaking at the Battle of the Bulge, first-person account. The editor, a military history specialist, opened the attachment to begin reading. By Arnold Franco, World War II, being far more fluid than World War I, marked the advent of the mobile radio intercept unit whose task was to pick up, decrypt if possible, and pinpoint enemy units sending their messages through the airways. The editor read the entire manuscript in one sitting. It was remarkable. a first-person account from a signals intelligence operator, written with precision and restraint, documenting an episode of the Battle of the Bulge that had never been publicly discussed. At the end of the article, Franco described the moment of discovery, the cryptanalysts of Detachment A, as well as various RAF wireless units, and Hut 3 at Bletchley Park, which apparently also took down some or all of the messages, had to wait until mid-1996, when our National Security Agency finally declassified all the documents. They then learned the only advance intelligence of the German offensive received in low-grade air codes was the warning of the parachute landings. The editor highlighted that sentence. This was history that had been sealed for 52 years, a story that deserved to be told. The article was published in August 2000. It appeared in print and online, illustrated with period photographs, carefully footnoted, meticulously sourced. Arnold Franco was 78 years old when he saw his story in print. He received 3 letters from other 3rd Radio Squadron mobile veterans, men he hadn't spoken to in 55 years. They thanked him for telling the story, for making sure their work was remembered. One letter came from the daughter of Raymond Keller, the anti-aircraft sergeant who had shot down the Ju-52s on December 17, 1944. Keller had died in 1987, but his daughter had heard him talk about that morning, the fog, the sound of engines, the feeling that someone somewhere had known the Germans were coming. "My father always wondered if there was more to it," she wrote, "if someone had warned them. Now I know. Thank you for finally telling us." Franco kept that letter in his desk drawer, next to the carbon copy of the message log and the NSA declassification letter. 3 documents, 3 pieces of the same story spanning 56 years. Arnold Franco's home, New Jersey, December 24th, 2005. Franco died the day before Christmas at the age of 83, surrounded by his family. The obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his service in World War II, his career in electronics, his dedication to his community. It did not mention the midnight shift at Chateau Beaumont. It did not mention the Elgar code or the duplicated message or the 2 hours of warning that might have changed the Battle of the Bulge, but the story was out there now, published, documented, part of the historical record. Franco's daughter, sorting through his papers after the funeral, found the filing cabinet in his study. Inside, the carbon copy of the message log, yellowed with age, the NSA letters, the published article, and dozens of other documents, intercept reports, code sheets, personnel rosters, carefully preserved across 60 years. She donated the collection to the National Cryptologic Museum at Fort Meade, where it was cataloged, archived, and made available to researchers. The midnight shift had been remembered. National World War II Museum, New Orleans, Louisiana. December 2024. The exhibit on signals intelligence operations during World War II opened on the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. It featured artifacts from Bletchley Park, from the U.S. Army Signal Corps, from RAF intercept stations, and from the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile. In the center of the exhibit, mounted behind glass, was a reproduction of Arnold Franco's message log from December 16, 1944. Next to it, a placard, "The Midnight Shift. On the night of December 15th to 16, 1944, cryptanalysts of the 3rd Radio Squadron Mobile intercepted and decoded German communications, indicating an imminent airborne operation in the Ardennes sector. Their intelligence alert, transmitted at 04:27 hours, provided Allied commands with approximately 2 hours of advance warning before the German offensive began. While the full impact of this warning remains uncertain, it represents the only tactical signals intelligence obtained prior to the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest American battle in the European theater. The work of these anonymous cryptanalysts exemplifies the critical but often unrecognized role of signals intelligence in modern warfare. Their midnight shift, 73 minutes of intense analytical work, provided Allied commanders with information that could have altered the course of the battle. Whether that information was used effectively remains one of the enduring questions of military history. Arnold Franco, 1922-2005, and his colleagues did their job with precision and professionalism. The rest was up to others. Visitors to the exhibit paused before the display, reading the message log, studying the timeline, contemplating the weight of 2 hours and the burden of uncertainty. Some asked the museum docents, did the warning make a difference? The docents, trained in historical accuracy, gave the only honest answer. We can't say for certain, but they tried. That's what matters. Epilogue. The question that remains. On the night of December 15th to 16, 1944, 3 men sat in a tower room in France working the midnight shift and intercepted a message that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They did everything right. They broke the code, they recognized the urgency, they transmitted the intelligence through proper channels with 73 minutes of lead time before the largest German offensive of 1944 exploded across the Ardennes. What happened next? Whether that intelligence was used, whether it positioned anti-aircraft batteries, whether it saved lives or changed outcomes, remains uncertain. The historical record provides hints but no definitive answers. The anti-aircraft engagement of December 17th could have been informed by Franco's alert, or it could have been simple reaction to audible targets. We will never know for certain. But this is certain: 19,000 Americans died in the Battle of the Bulge. Thousands more were wounded or captured. The offensive delayed Allied victory by months and shattered entire divisions, and the only advance warning came from the midnight shift. Arnold Franco carried the weight of that knowledge for 61 years. He never received a medal for his work. He was never officially recognized by the military establishment. His name appeared in no histories of the battle until he published his own account in 2000, 56 years after the fact. But he had done his job with precision, with professionalism, with competence under time-sensitive circumstances. The true heroism of the midnight shift was not in breaking codes or intercepting transmissions. It was in doing the right thing when no one was watching, when recognition was impossible, when the only validation would come 52 years later in the form of a bureaucratic letter that said, cannot be definitively established. Franco and his colleagues lived with uncertainty. They lived with questions that had no answers. They lived knowing that their 2 hours of warning might have saved lives or might have been ignored completely. They lived with the burden that every intelligence professional carries, the knowledge that they did their job, and the uncertainty of whether anyone used it. That burden is heavier than any medal, and carrying it day after day, year after year, decade after decade, without recognition, without validation, without certainty, is perhaps the truest form of service. The midnight shift ended at Order 8 Gower hours on December 16, 1944, but the questions it raised have never ended, and perhaps that is the real legacy. Not answers, but the reminder that in war, as in intelligence work, certainty is rare, and doing your job well is sometimes all you can control. Arnold Franco understood that. Eventually, it took 52 years, but he understood.